Hello, hello, and welcome back here to Spherical Chicken in a Vacuum. Today I have something special for you, special in a bad sense, actually, nothing that I'm really proud of as a member of the academic. Yes, it's a sort of nightmare that I'm living in, and bad news keep coming and coming about papers that are retracted and problems with peer review and journals that are suspended and things like this. And basically, every week I have a reason to make a new video. And this week, everything started from these pictures that I saw in Instagram. These are 18 retracted papers. And if we pick two papers at random in that list, we can see that they all are from the same journal, which is Science of the Total Environment, and they have something else in common. Can you spot it? Yes, it's the name of the author Malafaya. That it's common to all 18 papers. All 18 papers were published in Science and Total Environment. All 18 papers have the same author as corresponding author or one of the authors. And all of them have been retracted, which is a serious problem. But why? Why those papers were retracted? Basically, this is the accusation that Elsevier is moving to Professor Malafaya. Elsevier is saying that the reviewers that were proposed by the authors, during the submission process, you can suggest some authorities, some reviewers to review the paper based on their expertise on the field or their knowledge of the subject or the previous papers that they publish in the same field, etc. So you can suggest, and the journal can then accept or reject this suggestion. In this case, Elsevier is accusing Malafaya of controlling the peer review, meaning that he suggested some mail addresses that were not connected with the actual scientist. I mean, imagine that Elia Marin, I am an expert in, I don't know, Raman spectroscopy. And someone writes a paper about Raman spectroscopy, and he says, suggests that Elia Marin can be a reviewer, but instead of using my email account, he uses a Gmail email account with maybe elia/marine at gmail.com, something like that. So this is not the institutional email address, but a lot of scientists use alternative email addresses because there's just too much garbage that we need to manage every day. So the accusation is that these email addresses were not linked to the actual researchers, but they were controlled by Malafaya somehow. And this is a very serious accusation that comes from Elsevier. But let's start from the container. Science of the Total Environment is a pretty prestigious journal in the field of environmental sciences, and publishing there is pretty expensive. It has for open access, I mean. It has a really fast time for first decision, meaning that the editorial board is very active, and in 5 days they tell you if they will proceed with the peer review or they will immediately reject your paper. So while it looks like a nice journal with a side score of 17.6 and an impact factor of 8.2, I would say it's an above average, even a little higher journal. Okay? But it has a story of retraction, especially in the last 10, 15 years. And some of them see the same authors, but we will discuss about that later. And there was one really famous retracted paper in this journal which supported the use of traditional Chinese medicine in COVID-19 pandemic to controlling the COVID-19 pandemic, which was complete bullshit. As we all know, this paper got pretty famous actually. And this is a list of 50 retracted papers from Science of Total Environment. I could find I couldn't find 51 retracted papers online. As you see, I marked some of them in green and some of them in black, and there is a specific reason. If we just keep the black ones, they are all from Brazil, They are all actually there are 35. Here is 34 are listed. 35 35 or 35 out of 34 out of 35. So the ones that are here are because of fake peer review, and all of them, all of 34 of them, have one author in common, which is Malafaya, and they've been published between 2019 and 2023. Okay, so there's what is that? 4 years of range, 5 years of range, all with the same author. There is another subgroup with a similar problem, and it's with the Greek author, Professor Damalas. In this case, 5 out of 6 retraction that see a Greek author are from papers of Professor Damalas, and all of these 5 are retracted because of fake peer review. And if we have a look at the profile of Professor Damalas, we can see that the period in which these papers have been published in red, which is 2017-2018, is the same period in which his profile started to grow really fast. And then the papers were rejected in 2019-2020, and then his profile collapsed. So I don't know the story of this guy, but I found it interesting that there was another subgroup with some problems related to fake peer review, and I wanted to mention it to you. You can draw your own conclusions about the activities involved in these publications. Okay. Just I want to go back to our Professor Malafaya Guillermo. He started to write papers more or less at the same time I did, and he published a lot, but he didn't publish in with a constant at a constant rate. The number of publications grow exponentially in the last 5 years, more or less, and the publication of the last 2 years account for basically half of what he publishes in entire career. This is strange. This is unusual, because especially from a young researcher that doesn't have so many people directly under him. If you have a look at his papers and you check the author list, you will see that there's not many people working in the same institution that are co-authors of Professor Malafaya. This is unusual and maybe suspicious, but it's not a clear accusation. There's no proof that there's been some ill intent or misuse of the publication system, etc., just by looking at the publication graphs here. Okay, I want this to be absolutely clear. Unusual, strange, worth taking a look at. And also, this is the reason why I knew about Professor Malafaya long before his papers were rejected, because one PhD student from Brazil wrote to me. We were speaking online about authors with a long list of suspicious list of publication, and this PhD student claimed that Professor Malafaya was involved in some shady business because he was publishing a lot. And I replied, no, this is not enough. You don't have any hard evidence of misbehavior just by looking at the publication. You can have some, it can be a suspicious activity, but you don't have any hard proof. Okay, so don't fall for these things. Just don't just look at the data. Try to dig a little bit deeper if you want to check by yourself. And this is the reason why I contacted Professor Malafaya myself, because after I read the post on Instagram, which is very emotional and is clearly not something intended to be read by the scientific community. It's a lot. There's a lot of personal statements, and the hard scientific contents are a little diluted in emotions. But I can imagine in the same situation, I would be probably as emotional as he is. But I contacted him because this is just an Instagram post. I wanted to hear his opinion. And he sent me a letter, an open letter that he sent to the scientific community, and he sent me some other emails with the additional explanations, etc., etc. And, well, he sent me a lot of material. The open letter itself is huge. So I will try to summarize Professor Malafaya's position. Okay? So basically, these are the points. The letter is much long, much longer, but some things are repeated many times. I just try to put everything together in a few points. First point, he claims that the editor-in-chief, Professor Barceló, has a conflict of interest because he's co-author of some publications with Malafaya. He claimed that some editors of the journal also act as authors for papers published in the journal, that it's a lack of ethical behavior in his point of view. He claims that the journal did not properly verify the identity of the reviewers when the reviewer suggested list was submitted. He conducted his own analysis that shows that there was no clear bias. So even if unknown people did these reviews were not clearly in favor of Professor Malafaya. He submitted a list of 20 international researchers that support his professional integrity and ethical behavior. His university IT department found access to his accounts from 40 different IPs. He received more than 50 alerts for attempts to access to his account on Google, Yahoo, etc. His passwords were found on the web. The investigation by Elsevier was not transparent. The communication was not on time, was not clear. The journal now is on hold on Web of Science due to concerns about the quality of the review. The investigation didn't start because they found him guilty, but it started because didn't start because of the peer review problem. It was flagged because of the high number of papers he published in the recent years. Elsevier did not prove that the email addresses were fictitious, and Elsevier did not clarify why the reviews were considered fictitious. Okay. Out of this, I will immediately cut out the ones about informatics, hackers, and things like that, because when you submit the paper, you submit the list of suggested reviewers. And since these are papers of Professor Malafaya, he never complained that someone submitted papers in his name. So this is his own work. There's no reason there's no way someone from outside could have modified those files, because they all submitted at the same time at the moment of the submission. So if the submission was from Malafaya, these names, these addresses were submitted at the same time, so they were submitted by Malafaya or someone on behalf of Malafaya, but not a hacker, for sure. Otherwise, he will have noticed that someone was controlling his mouse when he was sending these emails, right? There's no other way. There's no way that after you submit, you also add reviewers. That's not how it works. It's all submitted in the same package one time. Okay? Then there is the thing about his own investigation that shows that there was no bias, and the letters from the scientists that I found really weak points to list for two different reasons. You cannot do your own investigation about yourself and your ethical behavior because you're biased. And also, no one can trust you because it comes from you. Even if you present some data, you need to present the raw data, first of all, but this needs to come from a third party that is not involved. Otherwise, it has very, very low value. Another thing is the list of the supporting letters. Professor Malafaya said that the letters will not be shared, but if someone asks to read the letters, then he will ask the permission to the ones that send the letter. And this is strange, very strange. So strange that I don't really trust this position. Because when someone writes a letter to support a scientist, this is an open letter. This is made to be read by everyone. And also, how can people trust that this letter exists if they need to ask to see the letters and he needs to ask permission to share? This is not a strong point in support of the ethical behavior of Professor Malafai. I'm sorry to say, because I really appreciated that he replied to my emails, but this is not a strong supporting point. Next. Elsevier didn't prove that the emails were fictitious. Well, we also have interviews. They came a little after this letter, maybe, but we have interviews of the real scientists that were whose names were used to do the reviews. So we know for sure that the emails were fictitious because they never received anything to review. So this point now doesn't make sense. Maybe at the time made sense because Elsevier did not share this. But we interviewed Science in this article. Interviewed one of them, and the thing that the journal is now on hold on Web of Science, so it's not a reliable source. Well, it's on hold because of your investigation. It's on hold because of your papers, of the papers with your name that account for more than half of the papers that have been retracted from this journal. So the investigation started because of your activity. And the reason why the journal is on hold is because of this suspicious activity. So the journal actually put itself in the condition of being suspended on Web of Science, which is the opposite. It's a good sign. It's a sign that the journal admitted that something was not done in the correct way. And they tried to fix it by flagging some papers, and they damaged themselves to clean their reputation. So, wow, this is a very weak point again, because again, it's all connected. Most of the retractions that this journal ever saw are these Malafaya's papers. Then we have the clarify why the reviews were not authentic. Well, it doesn't really matter that the reviews sounded scientifically sound, because we don't know the identity of these reviewers. They are mysterious figures. We don't know if they are really experts or not. We don't know who controlled this review. So it doesn't matter that they are neutral or unbiased. We don't know who they are. Not us, as on the other side, we should not know, but the journal should know. And the journal didn't have any control on these figures. The journal doesn't know who they are. So this is serious, because they were tricked. It was a fake. Then there's the thing about the conflict of interest of the editor-in-chief. Malafaya and the editor-in-chief published some research together, but the editor-in-chief is a huge scientist in environmental science, and they published a few papers, and I don't understand why the editor-in-chief would have damaged his own reputation in this way. It doesn't really make sense to me. There's nothing that he could gain. There's nothing that he could really lose. So if he manipulated the peer review in favor of Malafaya, he did for one paper, because they only had one paper in common, and he will risk to ruin his own reputation for that. Well, it seems a little bit stretched, especially considering how much the editor-in-chief actually published in his life, and how serious are the journals he already published on. So, little weak. I want to spend a little bit more about the point that the high number of paper published flagged Malafaya, and this started the investigation. Malafaya uses this argument to say that the investigation was started because he was flagged in some not clean, not, how can I say, not proper way. But to me, it's a sign that the system is working, because they noticed some unusual activity and they started an investigation. And they didn't immediately retract the papers of Malafaya. After they did their internal investigation, they started to retract the papers. On the results of their investigation, they found that the emails were fake. So yes, maybe they started a little late, okay, but they did their own investigations because there were some activities that were suspicious. And it was not the suspicious of activities themselves that made the papers retracted. It was when they proved that the emails were fake that the papers were retracted. So it's a plus sign on my in my way of thinking for the journal or for Elsevier, that is trying to control that the things are properly done even after the papers are published. And if there are problems, they they even damage their own reputation. They even got their journal suspended because they try to fix it. It doesn't mean that Elsevier is a saint, but looks like a positive point. And there are the other 3 points. Some editors, the journal also act as authors and submit their own papers. I don't like it because I think that being an editor gives you power, gives you control on the publication in your journal. Well, it depends on the level of the editor, but somehow you are an insider. So you have some advantages, which is not so ethical in my opinion. Well, it depends on the situation, but I don't like it. So I understand when Malafaya says this. I would prefer that the editors only write things that are clearly editorial, or letters from the editor, things like this, in which the role of the author as an editor is clearly stated, because there could be biases and preferential behaviors. Okay. Then the journal didn't properly verify the identity of the reviewers. This is a huge problem, huge issue. And I totally agree. This is a big problem because a journal received the names of the authors with an email address. And if they searched that email address on the web, they would have found that it was no way related to the name of the reviewer, the name of the scientist. And they could have checked if it was correct or not. Or they could have contacted the reviewer using the reviewer using one of the institutional email address to check if the identity was okay. But no, because you know the industry. We need to publish. We need to roll. We need to continue eat papers and produce papers as soon as possible, and there's no time, there's no resources, there are other interests, and so these things are overlooked until it's too late. So absolutely, this is a mistake from Elsevier not to verify the identity of the reviewers and just trust what the authors submitted. And then there was the lack of transparency. I often spoke with Elsevier because of issues with my papers, because sometimes I had a voucher and after they claimed that the voucher was not valid and things like that. I had long conversation with Elsevier, and the replies are slow, and the people in charge of the communication changes constantly, and there's overall a lack of transparency. It's very difficult to have a clear answer, to have a fast reply and a clear answer on a problem. So I trust Malafaya when he says that this investigation went on too long. At the beginning, they were not telling him exactly what was happening, who was at fault, etc. And they also made some mistakes in their communications. Absolutely, I trust it. This is because Elsevier is not managing the things well on their side too. For example, they listed the retraction note that says that Malafaya was the corresponding author, even in papers in which he was not the corresponding author. So this is because things are managed poorly on that side too. But there are only a few scenarios that are possible at this point. One is that there was a mysterious hacker, like Malafaya claimed, that took his paper, submitted this paper for him, submitted the fake reviews, and got the approval of Malafaya, because there's no other way that these fake emails could have entered in the process. Okay. Second possible scenario is that Malafaya himself or someone else for him submitted the paper with the fake email address to control the peer review. Third scenario is that Elsevier is lying and the emails are related to real scientists, and they're doing this because of some beef between Malafaia and someone else. And fourth scenario is that Malafaia used some agency to submit the paper, and the agency tried to control the peer review. And this is getting more and more common, actually. This is this agency that promise you that they can increase your number of papers, increase your number of citations. Some are legit agencies that just support you to do the paperwork with the submission. Some are shady businesses that promise you control on publications, etc., etc. So there might be some external agency involved that Malafaya doesn't want to speak about. But these are the only four possible scenarios. And I don't have an answer because I'm not the judge and jury of the situation. I don't know what else it's to be known about this story. I have my own opinions. I think you can guess what my opinions are, but I don't have any hard proof of what happened. So you can have your own opinion, but just please try to be as much informed as possible and not jump into the conclusion without doing your own investigations, okay? And also remember that we will never have the clear picture of the situation because we were not directly involved. So be scientific, collect the data, draw your own conclusions, and then admit what are the limitations of your knowledge. This is what I could collect, this is what I share with you, and you can draw your own conclusions. See you next time. Hello, hello, and welcome back here to Spherical Chicken in a Vacuum.